V'osuli mikdash v'shochanti b'seichom. With these 5 words, the Torah introduces us to a completely new aspect of the Chumash, a new era in the life of Klal Yisrael. Having gone through Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah and all the Nisim and the Gilui Shechina and hearing the Dvar Hashem, now Klal Yisrael were called upon for this collective project of building the Mishkan. And there's so many very beautiful and amazing ideas in every little detail of the Mishkan, because this wasn't just an ordinary building project. Chazal say, for example, about Betzalel, they say in Gemara Brachas Daf Nun Hey, Yodea hoya Betzalel letzaref ha'osios shebohen nivru shomayim v'oretz. This is a mystical idea. The Chazal say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used the letters of the alphabet in some way to create Shomayim v'oretz, and Betzalel was given Chochmah, Bina, and Das. And Rashi says on the word Das, he was given Ruach HaKodesh, that Betzalel had skills far beyond the skills of a craftsman. He knew how every single detail of the Mishkan corresponded to some detail of the Brias HaOlam, of the way the world was created. And whereas the world was created a physical universe, the point of the Mishkan was to introduce Kedusha, to introduce sanctity to every single small part of the entire world. And that was going to be the focal point of the Jewish people going forward. So much has to be said about the Mishkan and every detail of it. I'd like to focus on probably one of the most strange features that we find in the beginning of this week's Parshat Terumah, and that is at the very, very heart, at the epicenter of the Mishkan, lies the Aron HaKodesh, a sealed box of the Aron of gold and of wood, containing the Luchas Abris that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down from Har Sinai, and where only the Kohen Gadol went in once a year on Yom Kippur, and was inaccessible. Nobody ever saw it, but it was there, and it passively generated the Kedusha for the entire Mishkan. But what's more fascinating, I'd like to look at just for one moment, is the Pasuk says that on the Kaporis, on the lid of the Aron, we have to make 2 keruvim. Manufacture 2 keruvim, which have to be made out of beaten gold, and there are 2 images. And just like the Aron was 10 tefachim high, roughly about a meter high, similarly the keruvim were another meter high. So you have these 2 images, cherubic, angelic images, on the top of the Kaporis. And what do we know about them, and what could they possibly mean for us? I'd just like to look at that for a minute. In a sense, so what does the Pasuk say? V'hoya kruvim posei kenofayim lamala. They had wings stretched upwards towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, towards heaven. Upneihem ishel ochiv, and they were facing each other. Upneihem ala kaporos, and they were also facing downwards at the lid, in other words, at the Luchas Abris themselves. What is this really all about? Firstly, I must say, the Mepharshim asked the question, surely the Torah told us in the 2nd commandment of the 10 commandments, Lo saseh lecho pesel, we're not allowed to make sculptures of human forms. And yet, these keruvim were exactly that. They were sculptures of human forms, 2 human faces in a cherubic sculpture facing each other. And the Chizkuni goes so far as to say that actually, yes, within the Beis HaMikdash we find that the Beis HaMikdash was, and the Mishkan and the later on the Beis HaMikdash were designed to be an area which was in a sense otherworldly, was a different planet. When you entered the Beis HaMikdash or entered the Mishkan, you were in a different zone. And this was emphasized halachically by the fact that several very important mitzvahs of the Torah were suspended in the Beis HaMikdash. Primarily, the most obvious one is that all the sacrifices, the making the fire, the burning the sacrifices, the lighting the menorah, took place on Shabbos. And they made the menachas into bread. There was baking, there was cooking, there was burning, there was slaughtering, there was a building of the the lighting of the menorah, all this took place every Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash. So clearly the restrictions of Shabbos were suspended in the Beis HaMikdash, giving it a very otherworldly feel. The things that were normally completely forbidden to the highest degree, L'saseh kol malacha, suddenly were permitted. Similarly, says the Chizkuni, shatness, the issur of mixing wool and linen, also was suspended in the clothing of the Kohanim. There was Techeles Argomon, Telas Shani, V'Sheish. And the Techeles Argomon, Telas Shani were all different colored wool, and Sheish was linen. Linen and wool threaded together into one garment. So the laws of sharpness were suspended, the laws of Shabbos were suspended. Says the Chizkuni, the laws of lo saseh lecho pesel, not to make any graven images, was also suspended in the manufacture of the keruvim. So we have here something of extremely interesting symbolism. And what can we make of it? Why were there two angelic-looking figures on top of the Aron HaKodesh looking at each other? What did this symbolize? So there are lots of very interesting, different ways of looking at this. Samson Raphael Hirsch, for example, says that why were there two keruvim? To symbolize the fact that there are two halves of the Torah. The mitzvahs bein Adam lemokom and mitzvahs bein Adam lechaveiro. Those mitzvahs that connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Shabbos and Tefillin and Tzitzis and Yom Kippur, and those mitzvahs which connect us to each other, mitzvahs of Chesed and of Tzedakah. And those two categories of mitzvahs, each one was one of the keruvim, represented one half of the Torah, and they were Paneim Ishel Ochiv, and the whole validity and kedusha of the Torah depended on these two halves of the Torah really being integrated together and working hand in hand with each other. That actually the Torah required Klal Yisrael to develop both our spiritual abilities to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and realize that we're living Shavisi Hashem Negdi Samid in the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and at the same time to be able to develop the sensitivity, the care, and the generosity to engage in a life of Chesed. And this is really the two halves of the Torah. We find with Avraham Avinu as well. Chazal say that Avraham Avinu had two real lessons that he was teaching mankind. One was Emunah and one was Chesed. These are the two halves, says Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, which were the two keruvim represented. I saw something very beautiful, though, in the Baal HaTurim, quoting really from Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer from the Medrash. He says, the two keruvim, Panehem Ish El Ochiv, is a very beautiful phrase of friendship and of love between these two faces, these two images. And what do they represent? They represent like Shnei Chaverim Shenosim V'Nosnim B'Divrei Torah. They're like two people who are engaged in Torah discussions. That's what the Medrash says. That in actual fact, the two keruvim represent something very powerful, and that is that while the luchos inside the box represent Torah Shebichtav, the written word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is immutable, unchangeable, and infinite, but in a sense static, is what it is and will never change. There is something else called Torah Shebaal Peh. The Torah Shebaal Peh is nosim v'nosim b'divrei Torah. The way we engage with the Torah and we discuss it with Dibarat Obam and we teach and learn Torah, that is the dimension of Torah Shebaal Peh, which is represented by the keruvim. And that is really the dynamic aspect of Torah, which is absolutely vital going forward in each generation to apply the Torah under new circumstances, get deeper and deeper understandings. That's the Chaye Olam Nota B'Sochenu, right? The bracha that we say after the Aliyah, when you go up to Aliyah to Torah, you first say Shenosan Lonu Torah's Emes. So the Emes is the immutable truth of the Torah Shebichtav. And Chaye Olam Nota B'Sochenu, that's Torah Shebaal Peh. That is in us. Within us, there is the ability to understand, to develop, to explain and understand and discuss Shnei Chaverim Nosim V'Nosim B'Divrei Torah. That is the two keruvim. And I think that's a second parish, which is very, very beautiful and very meaningful. A third parish I saw in the writings of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Tov, who speak about the keruvim represented love. the love that existed between these two Kruvim were looking at each other lovingly. In actual fact, the Chazal say that one had the face of a boy and one had the face of a girl. That they were looking at each other, that in fact the image, like in the Shir HaShirim, the image of the love between a man and a woman is symbolically the love that we have between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that love, that the Keruvim represented the ultimate power of love. What sort of love is it? So the Baal Shem Tov famously said about himself, he said, I have come into this world to teach three things. One is Ahavas Hashem, the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The other is Ahavas Yisrael, the love of the Klal Yisrael, the nations of Am Yisrael. And thirdly, Ahavas HaTorah, a love for the Torah itself. That's my whole life summed up in one sentence, the Baal Shem Tov said about himself. And basically the Talmidim say that he found that symbolism in the Kruvim, in these cherubic figures who represent love. They were also posei kenofayim lamala. They also had their wings pointed upwards to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as an expression of Ahavas Hashem, a love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They also had Upneihem Ish El Ochiv. They also had a loving countenance for each other, B'Seiv upon him Yofos, and that is the Ahavas Yisrael. And they also had Upneihem El HaKaporis. They also faced downwards to the Kaporis, which was the Torah, was contained within the Aron HaKodesh. All these three aspects are hinted at in the details of these Keruvim. So here you find a very fascinating detail, which lay at the very, very heart of the Mishkan. And ultimately, the Pasuk says that throughout the 40 years in the Midbar, whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicated with Moshe Rabbeinu, as happened many times, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, where did the sound of the Kol Hashem come from? So the Pasuk there says, "V'no'adati itcha v'dibarti itcha me'ala kapores mibein shnei hakruvim." The voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu communicated itself with Moshe Rabbeinu from exactly that spot, the spot which combined both the ultimate emes of the Torah with the love that existed among Klal Yisrael, the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the love of the Torah, and the love of Am Yisrael. That love really lay at the very heart of the Mishkan, and that was really the bracha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was giving to us with the building of the Mishkan, and we should all be able in some way to draw strength and inspiration from understanding how that really was the new beginning of the future of Klal Yisrael. V'chein Yehi Ratzon.